Welcome to Out with Dan, the podcast that spotlights and examines the voices of LGBTQ+ authors, characters, and our allies. Together, we lift our voices and we tell our stories. I'm Dan White. Join me as I chat with this week's author. Hello and welcome back to Out with Dan. I am beyond excited to talk to ELLY GRIFFITHS today about The Frozen People, which is just out now. ELLY was shortlisted for the Gold Dagger Award, and she's the winner of the Mary Higgins Clark and the Edgar Allan Poe Award. I'm in good company today. Welcome, ELLY.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. This is really fun.
Oh, I'm very excited about it. So can you give the audience an overview of what The Frozen People is about?
Yes, so The Frozen People starts with a detective called Ali Dawson. She lives and works in the East End of London. And as we meet her, she's going to work. She works for a cold case department. And their joke is that their cases are so cold, they're frozen. So they call themselves the Frozen People. But actually, their cases are so cold because they go back in time to solve them. So Ali is part of a kind of secret team that have worked out how to time travel, thanks to a brilliant Italian physicist. But when we meet her, she's only traveled in time just a few years back. But she gets a request to go back to 1850 to Victorian London, and she does so. So that's where we start with Ali in the book.
I love that. So I know that you and your husband, Andy, sort of sketched this out one day. What was the impetus for this particular, because this is very different from the Ruth Galloway series and your other series. So this is something new for you. So what about this particular genre or theme inspired you?
Well, it's funny, really, because, yes, it is different from other stuff that I've done. And Andy's an archaeologist, so he was very useful in my sort of longest running series. Of course, he's useful generally, but he was particularly useful with this series because Ruth Galloway is an archaeologist. So he's kind of really helpful with background and getting people for me to talk to. But all the time, really, ever since I've been a writer, before I was a writer, really, I think probably since I was a child, I had this phrase, time traveling detective, in my head. And, you know, when I was young, I loved time travel books, you know, A Wrinkle in Time, Thomas Midnight Garden. I think children's fiction does time travel really well, actually. But I just couldn't think of a way to make it into a crime novel. And then I was talking with Andy, and we were talking about the idea of collectors, those people who, and there are lots of them in Britain, sort of probably usually going back to the 19th century, who just travelled around collecting odd things, which are held in store of lots of museums, sometimes not on show because the provenance is very dodgy. And so I kind of thought of that. And then I came up with the character of Ali Dawson, and that she would go back in time to investigate these collectors. So that's kind of how it came together.
I love it. And so I love the fact that Ali has a great sense of humor. I'm going to quote a line, you can pretend to be a widow, I often do. And I thought that was such a cute thing because she's sort of making fun of the fact that she's been married 3 times. And while her husbands are still alive, I think she would just as soon they not be one way or another. But the humor came through so nicely. Did you have fun writing the humor for Ali?
I'm so glad you like that bit, Dan. Yeah, because of course she's been married several times, but when she goes back into Victorian times, they assume that's because all the husbands are dead, and she's very, very quick to just kill them off. Really, I really did. Yeah, and I always think that really it's down to the character whether you believe in a book or not. And of course I'm asking you to believe in quite a big thing in this book, in this idea that this group of people can travel in time. So I felt that I'd have to have my readers, you know, really believe in the characters, and then they'd believe in this kind of premise. So I wanted to make Ali very believable, and I kind of liked her dry humor and the way I think the first time she meets Kane Templeton, who's this rather sinister Victorian character, he starts quoting at her, and that finishes her off because she hates men who quote to her. So I wanted her to be kind of feisty in that way as well.
I'm not fond of that either. I have a couple of friends that they quote movie line after movie line. I'm like,
Oh,
I saw the darn movie. I don't really need to hear be original. Give me something original to work with.
we
So,
don't have to go over it. Though I have to say it's slightly a joke at my expense because my family would say that I'm always quoting Shakespeare. So I do have, like, you know, when you use one of those automatic cash machines, which you don't use so much now, whenever the money comes out, I always say to it, "Thanks, courteous wall," which is from Midsummer Night's Dream. And
oh,
my,
that's cute.
you know, my kids are like, "Oh no, don't do that Midsummer
No.
Night's Dream quote." So I guess I am guilty of that a bit.
So give the audience a description of what Allie looks like in today's world.
Yes, because I thought that if I was going to have a character who'd go back to 1850, which is where Ali goes back to, I'd have to have somebody. I want to start with somebody who's a very modern woman, really. And one of the things about Ali is she has bright red hair. I mean, the color of your shirt. And I guess this is kind of a secret desire of mine to have hair that color, because I just love it when people have hair of a color that couldn't be natural.
Right.
And so she has this bright red hair, she has a nose ring, she's modern looking, and she has to kind of turn herself into a Victorian woman. She has to wear, it's before the crinoline, but there were kind of layers of skirts. So I had real fun researching the clothes that she says she has to have loads of uncomfortable clothes on and a corset, and turn her lovely red hair sort of dull brown. And she says, "Oh, I'm not a fan of natural things, so her hair has to be a natural color." So that was really fun, and I thought I would have to take a character, you know, because you do walk around the streets, particularly maybe in Britain, and you see people who could be Victorian. You know, there's a certain look, but I wanted Ali to be not that sort of person, to be somebody kind of very modern looking.
Well, and so, you know, one of the things that I can tell that you did as the author, Allie does in the book as well. So she goes back to her college professor, Elizabeth, for advice on what, because Elizabeth specializes in Victorian history. And so Elizabeth says to her, well, it's not only about your dress. There's so many other things that, you know, that women weren't allowed to do during this period. You know, in a lot of ways, women were still owned by men or their family or what have you. They were a tradable commodity, and they didn't have an opinion because no one wanted to hear what a woman thought. And here's Allie, who's quite a feminist. And I thought to myself, oh, my stars, I'd be like Allie. I'd be in trouble from the minute I arrived in 1850.
Me too, definitely. Yeah, and I wanted to kind of make that point because Elizabeth says to her, it's not just about researching it. You know, you're a feminist, you're an atheist. You've got bright red hair. You're going to really stand out. You know, I think she says they'll think you're a witch. And Ali says, oh, isn't that more 1700s? But of course it isn't, because women were still oppressed. I mean, and arguably, obviously, still are today. But you know, women didn't get the vote in Britain till after the First World War. Women couldn't buy property. There were all sorts of restrictions on them. And Ali, as this kind of widow, because she's killed off her husbands, but she hasn't got much money. She has some coins that the British Museum have given her, but she really doesn't have much money. She doesn't have any status. So it is difficult for her. And she does, you know, address that. She addresses the, you know, the idea of the patriarchy. And of course, it's still with us. But it's maybe more extreme in Victorian London.
Well, and you know, something that I thought of when I was reading it. So Isaac Templeton appeals to the agency to send someone to sort of exonerate his great-great-grandfather. And one of the things that I sort of chuckled about is, you know, we humans are so full of ourselves because we never think that, well, if somebody goes back in time, what if they don't exonerate the great-grandfather? What if we find out the great-great-grandfather is even far worse than we originally thought? And I thought to myself, you know, that gives a lot of play. So you must have had a real good time with trying that yin and yang of, you know, who's guilty and who's not guilty.
Yes, definitely. And of course, things that we rightly think of now as crimes maybe weren't considered crimes then, but he is considered guilty of quite serious crimes. And there's a murder of a young woman in 19th century London when Ali gets there, and she's quite shocked to see how little it's investigated. And I think that probably was the time then. It was sort of the start of having a police force in Britain, but really they wouldn't spend that much time in investigating a poor woman's murder. So yes, and it is an interesting thing, isn't it? Because you go back, and I'm sure in America, in the States, you have a similar sort of program, but we have a program here called Who Do You Think You Are, where you go back in time and you find out about your ancestors, and sometimes they really weren't very nice.
Yes.
And I think that is a risk you take, isn't it? Because you go back and you find that really there are lots of skeletons in your cupboard.
Well, totally agree. You know, I grew up in a family that lovingly, and I'm going to quote that, lovingly rewrote our history to suit themselves. And
Right.
then I found a few things online that really, really contradicts that. And I'm like, wow, isn't that nice? You made yourself look so good when in reality, maybe your hands were a little dirtier than you'd like the descendants to know about.
Yes.
And it's like, wow.
And we do rewrite history. My dad was Italian and came over here sort of after the war, and he was saying that, well, he was a prisoner of war actually, but he was saying the number of Italians who say they were in the resistance. I mean, there was a pretty big resistance in that case. There must have been some who were fighting, but I think we all do that a little bit, don't we?
Yeah, and I think maybe it's for self-preservation as well.
Yeah.
You know, especially if you're on the losing team, you know, it's like, wow, you know, so it's like, so what about 1850 was the thing that really, really stuck with you rather than say 1890?
I often wished I'd picked 1857 because I think that's when the crinoline came in, but I did pick 1850 for a few reasons. I mean, years and years ago, I mean, long time ago, I studied for a master's in Victorian literature, so I really love the period. And 1850, I think, as Ali's professor Elizabeth says to her, well, Elizabeth puts it like this. She says it was a period when the Victorians kind of went mad. And that's because a few things coalesced at the time. There was a book called The Life of Christ, which was translated into English by George Eliot. And it put forward the proposition, which I don't think we think of as strange now, but it was very shocking at the time, which was that the Gospels were written after Jesus's life, so they weren't contemporary accounts. And this really shocked Victorians, because if you can't trust the Gospel, what can you trust? Then you get the origin of species, which tells them that, hey, you're not descended from angels, you're descended from apes. And then around the same time, you get Marx's Communist Manifesto. So it's all sorts of certainties were just going out of the window. And I think they did start to believe in some quite odd things. Mesmerism was very in, and spiritualism, and I'm not judging those things, but they did start to sort of look elsewhere for their answers. So I thought it was a really good place to start. Right in the middle of this century. The next year, which comes into the next book, you have the Great Exhibition, which is this great exhibition of sort of Victorian stuff, really, a lot of which they plundered from other bits of the world. So it's an interesting place to start. Victorians were sort of confident in themselves, and then I think they were quite shocked. And then you get the new industrial middle class coming in, and the sort of emphasis taken off owning land to having money and owning factories and things like that. So it's an interesting time. So that's where I landed there in 1850.
Oh, I love that. And I interviewed someone recently who Rob Osler set his book in 1898 Chicago, and his protagonist is a lesbian. And one of the things he said is, there are things written about 1898, but you can't really tell exactly what a lesbian's experience was because none of that is written about. So we do read about things about 1850, but yet at the same time, there are just lots of things that we can't really know for sure. I mean, when Allie gets there, I mean, one of the things that struck me is, we are so accustomed to clean streets. We don't say, oh, well, it's a little dirty. I mean, what Allie experienced in 1850 was very dirty compared to what we're accustomed to. And so, you did such a good job at her navigating. And
I'm so glad. Thank you.
Yes. And something else, because I love maps. I'm always curious about where streets are and where things are, and she points out that, she can't find some streets that she knows in modern day London. And I thought to myself, cities are like humans. They change over time. And what we don't, one street that may be very popular may move at some point, you know? And I was like, wow, that's interesting. Something to think of.
It really is. But also, don't you love it when you're in an old city like Chicago or London? Sometimes you can just look up or something,
Sure.
and then you'll sort of see the shape of the city as it was. Like
Yeah.
you might see a spire, or there might be a place like in Britain, there's famously a street called Fleet Street, which is where all the newspapers are. But actually Fleet was a river, and there used to be a river there. So they're clues in names, and British streets have wonderful names. There's I actually set a book in a real place called Bleeding Heart Yard. And you know that it's Red Needle Street, which is where the banks
Sure.
are, obviously where the tailors were. So I kind of love that. But just to go back to your point about, you know, the dirtiness of the streets and things, I was interviewed by somebody about this book in Britain, and he said, Doctor Who, which, you know, is a famously long-running TV series, he said, Doctor Who's been on television for 60 years and he's never gone to the loo. But Ali is in 1850 for a few minutes, and you tell us how she goes to the loo. But I don't know about you, but I find that really fascinating.
I do too, because I mean, you know, we have human experiences, so you know, they do happen every day. I mean, you know, it's just, and the more coffee I drink, the more often I go. So
well, exactly. And you know, very difficult in many skirts. So I wanted to kind of make that just to describe that a little bit. So just to describe, I suppose, because if you're writing a historical novel, which I love historical novels, you would describe the clothes and the food and everything, but it would just be how they are. But of course, she is this modern woman going back. So it does all seem strange to her. So it was quite fun to describe it in that way. And yes, there's a guy in the street, and this was apparently true, selling hot sheep's feet. I mean, I dread to think how hungry you'd have to be to eat a hot sheep's foot.
No, I don't do pig's feet either. No, it's just not going to happen. So,
no.
So you, in the atmosphere of this book, I find this is meant to be a compliment. So I find there's a lot of what's the word I'm looking for? Claustrophobia. At least so, and by that I mean, you know, I thought about something as simple as time travel, which is not simple, obviously, but you know, you have to fit through a portal, and Ali has to fit in a dress of many layers, and then Ali's co-worker Dina goes on a date with a guy who likes to scuba dive, and I'm like, all of these things that put pressure on your characters. And I thought, I don't know whether it was intentional or not, but I certainly felt their pressure under, you know, each character's pressure.
That's so great. Thank you. Do you know, I hadn't thought about the scuba diving, but I'm going to claim that now. I'm going to say that is part of, you know, but I really did want the reader to feel that claustrophobia, because I was thinking about, I know we talked about no spoilers, and this isn't a big one, but Ali does get trapped there. She means to come back, but she's stuck in 1850. And I was thinking, what would your primary emotion be? And of course, it'd be shock and it'd be grief and all that. But I think you'd feel claustrophobic because you couldn't escape. And as you say, she's in quite constricting clothes, and she's in a sort of small room and in a house, and sort of all bearing down on her. So I have to say, I'm very pleased that you had that reaction.
Yeah, I did. I felt like we were in it with Ali. I mean, Ali is such a likable character, you know, and you've done such a great job in navigating Ali's movements that we feel like we're really with Ali. But I will say that there was a lot of things about it that were very constricting for me as a reader, but that is certainly meant as a compliment, because I love it when I get an emotion from a book. I want to feel what the character feels, because I think that's important, and I think you brought it across so beautifully.
Oh, I'm so glad. Thank you.
You're welcome. So here's my goofy question, because I set Ellie up in advance. So I want to know what Pip's reaction to Terry is.
Oh, how cute of you. Think. So my cat's called Pip. I'm so glad you know his name. Often he's here, but my daughter's staying at the moment, so he has totally abandoned me to go and sit with her. No, I think Pip is actually quite a friendly cat. Before Pip, I had a cat called Gus, who was very much kind of alpha cat, and he wouldn't let any other cat in our garden. But Pip has actually got quite a few friends. So I think that Pip would come bouncing up to Terry, who is Ali's cat, who is a Siamese, and really want to be his friend, because that is his reaction to things. It's quite sad, really. And Terry wouldn't have any of it. Terry would no
Well, yeah.
way.
Well,
No
it's
way,
so
you
funny.
peasant, because Pip is, not a pedigree cat at all. And so I think Pip would be all for being friends, because that's he's a Leo like me, very gregarious. But no, Terry.
Well, and
Terry,
Pip looks so friendly on your Instagram feed.
he's so cute, isn't he?
Whereas
He's got
Terry,
white moustache.
yes, he's so cute. Whereas Terry, you've described as, being nervous and jittery and not really having, and right out at the beginning of the book, he bites Finn. And,
Yes.
it's like, oh my good heavens to Betsy. So I thought Pip would be like, she did not paint any of me into Terry.
I'm so glad. No, I don't think Terry is based on Pip. Funnily enough, I've got a friend, a British crime writer, really lovely woman, lovely writer called Barbara Nadell. And it wasn't until I'd almost finished the book I thought, oh no, I know that Barbara has a Siamese cat called Terry. And I wondered slightly, I've been channeling him. So I dashed off a quick text to Barbara. I said, oh, Barbara, I hope it's okay, because I've got character in my book, a cat character called Terry. Is that okay? And this is what I love about cat people, because after a bit, Barbara texted back. She said, oh, I've talked to Terry and he says it's okay.
So you got clearance from both.
So I got clearance, so that was fine. So I think maybe he's probably slightly influenced by Barbara's stories of her slightly more difficult cat.
Yeah, I have a friend that has a cat that I'm like, oh, we can't be in the same room together. It's just not possible. Some cats can be so friendly, and then some can just be like little demons. So,
Sometimes they can, yes. And friends say things like, okay, don't make eye contact with them.
Right.
No, it's not very calming.
That's absolutely true. Well, once again, the book is called The Frozen People. It's by ELLY GRIFFITHS. It's out now. It is so magical and so fabulous. Thank you so much for joining me, Ellie.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been great fun.
Oh, yay. I'm glad. Thank you for joining me for this week's episode of Out with Dan. You can find more information about this podcast and its host at OutWithDan.com, on Twitter at OutWithDan, and on Instagram and Facebook at Go Out with Dan. This podcast is hosted by Authors on the Air Global Radio Network, and the theme music is provided by bensound.com. Join us again soon for the next episode of Out with Dan.